So for this week's conversation, I'm very pleased to be joined by Anthony Lees-Smith, who is Vicar of Evington and also Area Dean of the City of Leicester. Thank you, Anthony, for agreeing to join me today. And we're going to have a bit of a conversation around the theme of pastoral care in particular. So the whole idea of how we care for one another in the midst of this pandemic, and indeed how we look after ourselves in the midst of it as well, realising that this can have big effects on us and our own psychological well-being as well. So Anthony, I wonder if I can just start then just by asking you very simply, how are you? How have you been getting on? How has this crisis affected you?
Well, one of the things I said on Sunday is I can imagine Jesus on the road to Emmaus with those two disciples. I don't think he'd have accepted an "I'm fine, thank you" as an answer, and as tempted as I am just to say I'm fine, I'm actually very tired. I'm feeling quite drained today. I was spending a lot of time on the phone and on Zoom meetings and things, which is kind of taking a lot of energy, I'm finding.
I can certainly empathise with that. It's tiring on these Zoom meetings in particular, much more so I think than in person, and in all sorts of other ways. It's taking it out of us as well. Are you okay to say a little bit more, Anthony, in terms of what you've observed about what this is doing to you personally, sort of inside of you? What have you seen of your own reaction to this?
Yeah, certainly. Somebody said to me recently, it must be like being on holiday at the minute with the church closed, and I held back a hollow laugh. But even comments like that actually, I find really difficult personally, because actually I'm busier in many ways than I was before, just in different ways. So as I say, spending a lot more time on the phone and in meetings like this on the computer. As a family, we're being quite strict about social distancing because of mine and my wife's underlying health problems. So we're the only time I'm going out really is walking the dog. But that's quite hard. And I know from talking to other colleagues across the deanery that there's a real feeling sometimes that you're not doing enough, and comments like the one about it must be lovely having a holiday don't help. I think it is really hard. And today I've had 2 or 3 phone calls this morning, pastoral calls, a couple of people who've been recently bereaved, and one call with somebody who was dying, and I just want to be there with people and be in the room with them, and I'm finding that really, really difficult. Praying with people over the phone is, it's the best we can do, but it falls a long way short from what I'd like to do, and I do find that hard.
And again, I can understand that, Anthony. There's something about the natural desire within us, isn't there, just to want to be with people, to be physically present with people, and that's really hard then to give ourselves permission almost to accept that we can't do that. And in a sense, enough is enough. We can't always be thinking that we should be doing more, and so on. But there is something nevertheless powerful about it. Even just the phone conversation, I think there can be something very powerful about that in terms of speaking into people's isolation and so on. And so I'm intrigued by the fact that I've been reflecting on the fact that a number of the letters within the New Testament were actually written by people who were in effect in lockdown. So I think of St. Paul writing to the Philippians from prison. And he shows both his care for the Philippians. He talks about how he has them in his heart. He longs for them. He prays for them. But there's also an element of frustration, that same sense of he wants to be with them. He wants to be alongside them. But the best he can do really is to encourage them to care for one another, and to serve one another in the same way that Jesus served others, and to be kind to each other and so on. I wonder if you have any sort of reflections on particular things from the New Testament maybe that have been speaking to you in recent days.
And I certainly relate to Paul's feelings there. And I think one of the really encouraging things talking to colleagues is the way in which people have shared with me how they've seen a real a deeper spiritual engagement from people actually through caring for one another in our churches. I had a couple of lovely letters this morning from people in my own congregation who have really appreciated things like the phone chains, the telephone conversations from others, and I think we're seeing that across our communities too, in terms of the mutual aid groups, the community responses from churches, and the way in which, in some places, people are receiving care from others in the community, their neighbours of other faiths and none, as much as they are giving. There's a giving and receiving of care, which I think is really encouraging to see.
Yeah, there's something of God's kingdom in that, I think, isn't there?
Absolutely.
It is beautiful. And Andy, you've been very honest in sharing some of your own sort of personal struggles at this time. And I'm aware that from conversations I've had with people as well, I think quite a lot of people feeling frustrated that they're not able to do things that they would normally do, or indeed do the things that they would want to do at this time. But I'm also aware that for some, it can be the other reaction, that there's a sort of flip side to that. And somebody sent me an article just this last week in response to the letter that we sent out to clergy. And the article was about the ancient idea of what's called acedia, which is not a word we use very often these days, but it was in the writings of sort of various monks and so on from a number of years ago. And it's basically, well, the word literally means not caring. And it's that idea of when we reach the point of just being so overwhelmed that even though we carry on going through the rituals or the practices of our religion, our heart goes cold. And we stop being able to care for other people. In fact, all we want to do is run away and just let go of all our responsibilities. And the advice of the monks and nuns who wrote about that was to say that actually you've just got to persevere with the sort of spiritual disciplines. But they also talked about it, one of them famously put it, go back to your cell and your cell will teach you everything you need to know, which is an interesting parallel in terms of us being locked down in our homes. But I wonder if you have any reflections on that idea of if we reach that point of just not being able to care, of struggling to look beyond ourselves, what do we do in those circumstances?
Yeah, I think I certainly resonate with that, and I think along with that, the feeling of not being able to do the things that we feel we ought to do, and I think that's a really difficult one. I some time ago read Rowan Williams's little book Silence and Honeycakes, and he talks about the response being to the one response to that feeling is to try and open up the present moment to God, and to try and deepen that engagement in the present. And for me, I found last year as a church, as we celebrated our a big anniversary, we took as a verse, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today and forever. And that sense of spending time remembering what God has done for us and his faithfulness. And of course, scripture is a great place to begin for that. And then because of that, entrusting him with the future and our anxieties about what's to come. And again, you mentioned Philippians. I love Philippians 4 and Paul's encouragement to offer all those things, all our worries and our requests to God in prayer. And then to just rest in that present moment and the way we're feeling now, and to discover the new things that God is doing. I love Luke Briggs' spoken word poem I shared with our church on Sunday, and that beautiful phrase he got about being on the cusp of heaven's new thing. And I know I've been discovering, I've been discovering that I can fix a patio door and unblock a toilet. Things that I perhaps wouldn't have thought I could do before, and I've had to do those things in the current situation. And I think there are new things that we can discover about ourselves if we just dwell in the present moment and open that moment up to God.
Yeah, I too. I loved Luke Briggs's poem. For those who don't know him, Luke is our university chaplain, and you can find his poem on the Diocese social media site as well. Anthony, I'm very, very grateful to you for just sharing some of your reflections on that, but in particular your personal honesty in how you're feeling and how you're coping in the midst of all of this. And I'm very aware, as I do these videos and they get sent out around the diocese, that they're going to people in all sorts of different situations. Some will be really struggling with all sorts of anxieties and pressures. Others I know have been actually quite relieved to have something of the sort of work pressures lifted off them in some ways. But we're all in different places, but in one way or another, knowing how to care for each other in the body of Christ, even with the limitations we face at the moment, is just so important. So my thanks to you, Anthony, for all that you're doing in caring for us. My thanks to people all around the diocese for the kindness, the generosity, and the care that you are showing. And it's certainly my ongoing prayer that people would have God's strength to be able to continue with that in the coming weeks ahead. My thanks and greetings to you all.